Good morning.
Good morning.
The title of the sermon this morning is A Miraculous Call to Freedom. I want to begin by offering my gratitude to the pastor of this church, Reverend David Black. David, it has been a joy to learn and study and work alongside you, and it is a joy to serve the Lord with you. Also, many thanks to the church leadership for the generous invitation to share the word today. And thank you to all the saints joining in worship, whether in Chicago or across the lands. Your warmth and presence are also a joy. Well, church, it's Black History Month. It is a time where we engage in the sacred act of remembering what God has brought us out of, as well as the promise and hope for what God is bringing us into. And it is in that spirit that I offer this word of that same divine remembering. I'll quickly pray. Holy God, help us listen. Help us listen and discern your voice. Give us the clarity to hear your call. Give us the strength and the courage to come before our God and answer yes to the same. Amen. And the last verse. So Moses went down and told them. And Moses told them so much, did he not? Why so much? Why so much fuss? Was it because God is holy and humans are not? Why expect so much preparation and deadly consequences from people who have been through the trauma of deadly and near deadly consequences over and over and over again? I do not believe that God was simply hazing the people or testing their loyalty. I believe that God was offering ritual as a way to help the people be present for their freedom. Ritual is one way that we acknowledge that a shift is about to take place. We open and close our days with bathing to signal a new rotation of the sun. We engage in spring cleaning to mark the changing of the seasons, but perhaps the problem wasn't that the people were dirty. Perhaps the issue is that they were distracted by the weight of oppression, by the horrors of war, the shock of death and destruction that was bound up on the journey to their not yet found promised land. Have you ever felt the weight of your journey and wondered whether you should keep going? Have you ever been distracted by your pain? I believe that God calls us to consecration, calls us to ritual, to shift our hearts from the terrible realities of the past towards the bright hope for tomorrow. Consecration asks us to dare to put our baggage down for a little while, lest we carry it to the mountain. When we put our baggage down for a little while, we can arrive with open hands and clear hearts, ready to receive good instruction from God, good instructions for our journey to freedom. I mean, how do you tell an oppressed people that they are to resist oppression and treat each other right? How do you build a radically new and beautiful community amongst people who are simply looking for safety and rest? People who are distracted by that very human need. Well, God decided what the people needed was a cleansing. Perhaps God called for this cleansing to reset the expectations of the people. While many were hoping for directions to the promised land, some clear GPS directions to Canaan, instead, God gave them instructions for a beloved community. God gave them the 10 Commandments. And still, this is a lot of preparation. But the people are not just preparing for a covenant with God. What Israel gains from this preparation is the covenant they will cut with God, written in stone and on their hearts. They get a new set of rules about being rescued, a commitment that sets a divine standard for their relationships with both their God and their people, with God's own creation. They get a blueprint for a covenant community, one that asks the people to not only choose God, but to choose each other. Israel declares, everything that the Lord has spoken, we will do. In unison, everything the Lord has spoken, we will do. And every so often, God shows up and does the same with us. God shows up and asks the same of us. When we are wandering and battling and singing our way out of old bondage and towards new glory, what is it to cut a new covenant with God and creation? It is experiencing God's sense of mutuality. It is seeing that interdependence is a mandate from God. It is realizing that in a new covenant, everyone has to choose, both God and the people. In chapter 19, God, goodness, has already been chosen for the people, yet the people had to choose the goodness stored up for them by God. They had to choose the more excellent way. In life's big transitions, we're simply choosing God over and over and over again. Like Moses and all of Israel on that mountain, there is something new on the horizon that we don't see yet, blocked by the smoke and the fire and the power of what's in front of us. But we get to choose goodness. We get to choose the promises. We get to choose God. Leaning on the miracles of yesterday can help us say yes to the promises of tomorrow. God says, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." The divine act of remembering yesterday's blessings can strengthen our faith and help us move forward. But God has empirical data. God has receipts. It had only been 3 new moons since their miraculous escape from Pharaoh, and yet God had provided manna, food from heaven, made bitter water sweet for them, brought them victory in unexpected battle, and saved them so stunningly from the Egyptian army that the only thing Moses and Miriam and the people could do was sing of God's glory and love for them. God had been there. God's great promise, then and now, is that God will continue to be with us. God continues to open up and offer up the choice, continues to remind us of our past blessings, and prepares us for a new, loving, divine communal life to come. So, how will we know that God is asking us to listen? Well, family, there are always signs in the sky. New moons and full moons, stars and rainbows and clouds, and sometimes leaders with the heart of Moses who come with thunderous God talk that remind us that God is working in our favor and on our relationships. Every day, there's a beautiful reminder to slow down and listen to God. And how is our covenant with God going? When we listen to God, what do we hear? How do we know when it's time to slow down and listen? Well, we can reflect back on the scriptures. God says in verse 5, "Indeed, the whole earth is mine." This is sufficient enough evidence that we are out of covenant with creation. We needn't wait for Moses to come down from the mountain to tell us so. The mountain itself, the very earth, is telling us. Lands suffer from drought. Wildfires in Australia, the Amazon, Central Asia, and the Arctic have taken their toll due to global warming. Smokestacks, hazardous gases, and other emissions plague our air. The Caribbean and southeastern US are ravaged by unprecedented hurricane damage, while oil spills, failed infrastructure, and ungodly politics mean that not everyone has sweet water like the children of Israel. Indeed, Flint and Milwaukee and Newark and Washington, D.C., and Baltimore and Dos Palos and Charleston and Newburgh and Miami, and so many more American cities still don't have clean drinking water. God's whole earth is declaring, we are out of covenant. It's time to listen to God. If we look around, there are reminders everywhere. I do not believe that God sent COVID-19 to make us suffer so that we might get closer to the Lord. No more than we are to believe that God enslaved Israel just so that they could experience their freedom and declare their loyalty. But in difficult times, that we will inevitably encounter, we can seek and find reminders to slow down, to listen to God, and work on our relationships, to work on our covenant. We see imbalanced relationships in the ways in which we have failed to commit to each other during this COVID pandemic. This pandemic has exposed the deadly dividing lines between young and old, rich and poor, those with adequate health care versus the uninsured and underinsured, those with comfortable income versus the unemployed or underemployed, those who are blessed with good health versus the great majority of us with pre-existing conditions. We see it in the breach between those who can work from home versus those who are deemed economically essential workers, but not offered the essentials of PPE, hazard pay, sick leave, or even essential dignity. When we slow down and listen for God and look up, it's easy to see we are woefully out of balance and out of covenant. Yet, God seeks to bring us back in alignment with the earth and with each other, back into a renewed divine commitment. And like Israel at the foot of the mountain, when we perceive the offer from God, we must choose. We may not get a new list of 10 commandments. No, like Moses, we just might get a call from God. We may get called to heed CDC guidelines for slowing community spread of COVID. What if we get the mandate for free high-speed internet as a public good? Perhaps we get the call to radically shift our approach to education so that we can protect teachers and educate students and support parents at the same time. We might get a call to a more balanced approach to energy, a call to an economy that puts people and the earth over profits. Surely we could get a call to house the homeless and create affordable and working class housing instead of commodifying human needs. Indeed, we have been called to clean, sweet water for all. When we listen, we just might get called to follow divine instruction for the welfare of our people. So why don't we commit? Some would point to the human tendency to sin, but if I'm honest, justice is simply hard work. The work of loving justice is difficult, but God is gracious. That has been true throughout the ages. And spoiler alert, Israel made it to Canaan, but they did not live happily ever after. Yet God kept calling them, keeps calling us to community and God's own self. God keeps calling us into balance. Like fire and smoke and thunder on a mountain, God keeps finding ways to break into our lives, to be seen, be heard, to be loved, and to love. It doesn't matter if you see yourself as a Moses speaking thunder with God, or a timid person in a shell-shocked crowd looking for direction. God has good use for you. Admittedly, talking with God can be scary. So it's okay to name that no matter how many times you do it, you think maybe you're just not cut out for it. It's okay to say that the fear and the insecurities that in the midst of that, you need some family to support you in the work. But like Moses, go up the mountain anyway. In your insecurities, rise in the mountain anyway. Talk to God anyway. You see, you were never meant to bring the thunder and the smoke and the fire. God said, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud in order that the people may hear when I speak to you. I am going to come to you. And so trust you ever after. Trust is developed with the people when you're caught communing with God. When people see you in communion with God, that's how they trust. Your job is to speak with God and follow God's instructions. And your view will be different than the people. Up on the mountain, you'll see things differently. Way up high, perhaps all Moses could see was the presence of God, shrouded by smoke and fire. But the people saw the miracle, and they trusted the instructions. And if you're the people, in deep community with each other, seeking good land and all that comes with it, seeking liberation and shared identity and freedom of worship and love, seeking fair and just labor. To you, the people, I say, expect a miracle. Expect God to show up in everyday miracles of food pantries, serving manna in a pandemic. Expect the everyday miracles of safe communities founded on good land and loving community gardens. Recognize the everyday miracle of a church choosing to listen for and hear God's call to peace and justice in this world. Lacking fire and clouds and mountains and smoke, these things are proof that someone is still surely talking to God. I implore you to keep listening for, talking to, and saying yes to God. In so doing, you are making miracles every day. Amen.